The deal that changed everything. The metal walls of the military base felt colder than usual. Commander Ronan had been in countless war zones, stood before alien warlords, and faced horrors that would break most men. But this? This was something new. A Vanthari warrior had just been handed to him as part of a so-called peace treaty. And she was staring at him like she'd rather die than be here. Ronan crossed his arms as the alien woman was brought forward by two heavily armored soldiers. Her silver skin gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and her piercing violet eyes locked onto his with something between defiance and fury. "This is Silva," the diplomat beside him said. "She is now yours." Ronan's jaw tightened. "I don't own people." The diplomat barely reacted. "It is a gesture of goodwill. A sign of unity between our people." Ronan looked at Silva again. Her muscles were coiled tight, ready to strike at the first sign of weakness. She wore the simple black tunic of a Vanthari soldier, but her hands were bound with a restraint device, glowing with blue energy. A captive. Not a guest. Ronan exhaled slowly. He hated this. But he also knew refusing would cause problems. The Vanthari Empire had been at war with humanity for decades, and this fragile truce was the closest thing to peace they had ever had. So he nodded once. "Fine." The diplomat smiled, as if he had done something honorable. "You will be responsible for her now." The moment the officials left, Ronan turned to Silva. She didn't move. "Let's get one thing clear," he said. "I don't know what they told you, but you're not my prisoner. I'm not interested in keeping you locked up." Her eyes narrowed. "Then what do you want?" Her voice was sharp, carrying the weight of someone who had been betrayed too many times. Ronan ran a hand through his short, graying hair. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I do know this isn't right." Silva studied him. "Then let me go." Ronan hesitated. It wasn't that simple. If she ran now, it could spark another war. "Not yet," he said. "But I promise, I won't treat you like a prisoner." Her jaw clenched. Ronan knew she didn't trust him. He didn't blame her. The first few days were tense. Ronan gave her space, allowing her to move freely within the base, under heavy watch. Silva remained silent, never asking questions, never engaging. She didn't sleep much. He could tell. On the third night, he found her standing by the window of the outpost's observation deck, staring at the stars. "Planning an escape?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I was given away like a bargaining chip," she said, voice quiet. "What would you do?" Ronan sighed. "I don't know." She finally faced him. "Why haven't you tried to interrogate me?" she asked. "Find out my weaknesses? My purpose?" Ronan shrugged. "I don't believe in using people." She studied him for a long moment. Then, boom. The entire outpost shook. Alarms blared. Ronan's earpiece crackled. "We're under attack." Silva's muscles tensed. Ronan grabbed his weapon. Another explosion rocked the base. But something was wrong. This wasn't a Vanthari attack. The ships outside didn't belong to any known faction. Ronan turned to Silva. "You know who this is?" Her expression darkened. "No," she said. But she was lying. Before he could press her further, another explosion ripped through the walls. They had to move. Now. Ronan and Silva exchanged a look. Enemies or not. They had no choice but to survive together. Bound by survival. The burning wreckage of the outpost crackled around them as Ronan and Silva ran through the smoke-filled corridors. Alarms blared, echoing through the metal walls, but most of the base's personnel were either dead or scattered. Ronan gritted his teeth as he pressed against a wall, checking the corner ahead. He caught a glimpse of enemy soldiers moving through the ruins, their dark armor reflecting the flames. They weren't human. They weren't Vanthari. "Who are they?" he whispered, glancing at Silva. She didn't answer right away. He could tell she knew something. "They shouldn't be here," she muttered. Ronan's patience was running thin. "You want to tell me what that means?" Before she could respond, a burst of plasma fire struck the wall near his head. They ducked, rolling across the floor as another barrage of shots rained down on them. Ronan lifted his rifle and fired back, dropping one of the soldiers in a single shot. Silva, still bound by the energy restraints, could do little but follow. "We need to get these off you," Ronan said, pointing at her glowing wrist cuffs. "I'm aware," she snapped. They moved quickly, weaving between fallen beams and bodies. The outpost was unsalvageable. Whoever these attackers were, they had come with the intent to wipe everything out. As they rounded a corner, a massive explosion erupted behind them, sending debris flying. Ronan hit the ground hard, his vision blurring for a moment. When he looked up, Silva was already on her feet, standing over him. "Come on," she said, offering a hand. Ronan hesitated. But he took it. They ran together, pushing through the destruction until they reached the outer hangar bay. Several ships were on fire, their hulls torn apart by enemy fire. Only one remained intact. "We're taking that one," Ronan said. "Agreed," Silva replied. They sprinted toward the ship, dodging more plasma fire. Ronan took out another enemy soldier while Silva used her agility to duck and weave through the chaos. Even with her hands bound, she moved like a predator, fast, efficient. As they reached the ship's ramp, a shadow loomed over them. A towering enemy warrior stepped forward, holding a massive energy blade. His armor was reinforced, his glowing red eyes locked onto Silva. She froze. Ronan didn't have time to think. He lunged forward, tackling the enemy. They crashed onto the metal floor, the warrior's strength nearly overwhelming him. Ronan barely managed to roll aside as the energy blade slashed down, cutting into the floor. "Ronan," Silva shouted. Thinking fast, he reached for his belt and pulled a small plasma grenade, activating it with a flick of his thumb. He shoved it into the enemy's chest plate. Boom! The explosion sent the warrior flying, his armor shattering. Ronan staggered to his feet, chest heaving. Silva stared at him for a moment, then nodded. "Not bad," she admitted. "Get in the ship," he said. They scrambled inside, sealing the ramp behind them. Ronan rushed to the cockpit, hands flying over the controls. "Can you fly?" Silva asked, stepping beside him. "Better than most," he muttered. The ship roared to life. Outside, the enemy forces realized what was happening. They turned their weapons toward the vessel, opening fire. Ronan pulled the controls back, lifting the ship just as plasma blasts struck the hull. The engines screamed, but they held. Within seconds, they were airborne, soaring into the sky. Silva exhaled. "We made it," she said. Ronan didn't respond. He had a feeling this was far from over. Unwanted truths. The stolen ship hummed as it tore through the planet's upper atmosphere, streaking into the darkness of space. Ronan gripped the controls tightly, scanning for any pursuing ships. Nothing yet, but that didn't mean they were safe. He glanced at Silva. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, arms still bound by the glowing restraints, her expression unreadable. "All right," he said, adjusting their course. "You want to tell me what the hell just happened back there? Because that sure as hell wasn't a routine execution." Silva didn't look at him. Instead, she stared out at the vast expanse of space, her fingers twitching slightly against the cuffs. Ronan sighed. "Look, I just risked my life getting you out of there. I think I deserve some answers." Finally, she turned toward him, her violet eyes studying him carefully. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said. Ronan let out a short laugh. "After everything I've seen today? Try me." Silva shifted in her seat. "The ones who attacked the base, they weren't just after me. They were after something bigger. And that something is?" Her jaw tightened. "A war." Ronan's fingers froze over the controls. "Excuse me?" "The Vanthari were never planning to execute me," Silva admitted. "They wanted information about a hidden faction operating in the shadows of the Galactic War." "The ones who attacked the base? They're part of it." Ronan frowned. "A hidden faction? Who the hell are they?" Silva exhaled. "They call themselves the Zenter. They operate beyond the known borders, striking at both humans and Vanthari alike. They don't fight for territory or resources. They fight to tear everything down." Ronan ran a hand through his hair. This just kept getting worse. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You're not a prisoner. You're a spy." She didn't deny it. Ronan cursed under his breath. "I was gathering intel," Silva admitted. "Until the Vanthari caught me. They thought I was a traitor to my own people. But the truth is, I was trying to stop the Zenter." Ronan leaned back in his seat, processing everything. "So why didn't you tell me this earlier?" Silva gave him a dry look. "Because you were holding a gun to my head?" "Fair point." The ship sensors beeped, alerting them to incoming activity. Ronan checked the screen. His stomach dropped. "We've got company." 2 enemy fighters had locked onto their location, closing in fast. "Can you fight?" Ronan asked. Silva lifted her bound wrists. "Not like this." He cursed. "Hold on." Ronan yanked the ship into a sharp dive, barely avoiding the first round of plasma fire. Alarms blared as the fighters pursued, their weapons lighting up the dark void. "We're not going to outrun them," Silva said. Ronan gritted his teeth. "I know." She leaned toward him. "Then let me help." He hesitated. But another barrage of plasma fire rattled the ship. They didn't have time for doubts. "Damn it," Ronan muttered, pulling out his knife. With a swift motion, he sliced through the energy cuffs. The restraints flickered, then shattered. Silva flexed her hands, power crackling at her fingertips. "Much better," she said. Before Ronan could react, she sprang into action, rushing to the weapons console. Within seconds, the ship's cannons roared to life. She fired a precise shot, taking out the first enemy fighter with a direct hit to its engines. Ronan took advantage of the distraction, flipping the ship in a sudden maneuver. The second fighter overshot them, giving Silva the perfect angle to fire. One blast. Then another. The second fighter exploded into a burst of fire and metal. Ronan let out a breath. "Remind me never to keep you restrained again." Silva smirked. Smart choice. But their relief was short-lived. The ship's sensors flared again. This time, the incoming signal was much, much bigger. A massive warship loomed ahead, its shadow swallowing the stars. Ronan's blood ran cold. "What is that?" he whispered. Silva's face paled. "Zenter command vessel," she said. Ronan exhaled slowly. "We're in trouble, aren't we?" Silva didn't answer. She didn't have to. Into the lion's den. Ronan gripped the ship's controls, his knuckles white. The Zenter warship loomed ahead, its jagged hull reflecting the distant glow of a dying star. This wasn't just a battleship, it was a floating fortress. "We need to get out of here," he muttered. Silva's expression was unreadable, her violet eyes fixed on the warship. "No," she said. Ronan blinked. "Excuse me?" "We can't run," Silva continued. they'll track us across the system. And if we lead them to a populated sector, she shook her head. No, we have to go in. Ronan let out a short, humorless laugh. You want to willingly fly into a Zenter warship? Are you insane? Silva turned to him. If we don't, they'll destroy us anyway. At least this way, we have a chance. Ronan's mind raced through their options. She wasn't wrong, the warship was already locking onto them. They had no jump drive, no safe sector to escape to. If they tried to run, they'd be blasted out of the sky. He sighed, rubbing his temple. I hate that this actually makes sense. Silva moved to the console, quickly overriding their ship's distress beacon. I'm sending out a surrender signal, she said. Ronan stared at her. Great. Not only are we flying into hell, we're walking in with our hands up. Trust me, Silva said. I have a plan. Ronan scoffed. You better, because I am not dying today. The warship's docking bay yawned open, a dark cavern waiting to swallow them whole. The moment they crossed the threshold, their ship's systems went dark. The Zenter had them. Inside the beast. A metallic hiss filled the air as the ship's hatch was forcibly opened. Ronan barely had time to react before armored soldiers flooded in, their weapons trained on him and Silva. The Zenter soldiers weren't like Vanthari warriors or human marines. Their armor was bone-white, segmented with black veins of energy running through it. Their helmets were featureless, save for glowing red slits where their eyes should be. One of them stepped forward, an imposing figure in a black cloak. Identify yourselves, he demanded, voice distorted through his helmet. Silva stepped forward, calm despite the weapons aimed at her. I am Silva of the Vanthari Resistance, she declared. I bring critical information for your commander. Ronan barely resisted the urge to facepalm. She was improvising. The soldier studied her, then shifted his gaze to Ronan. And him? Silva smirked. He's my prisoner. Ronan's jaw dropped. Excuse me. Before he could protest, Silva elbowed him hard in the ribs. He groaned, stumbling forward. The Zenter soldier gave a short nod. Very well. You will both come with us. Two guards grabbed Ronan's arms, forcing him forward. I swear, if we get out of this alive, you owe me a drink, he hissed to Silva. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked ahead, her expression unreadable. The warlord. They were led through towering corridors, the walls pulsing with a faint, eerie glow. This ship wasn't just metal, it was something alive. Ronan's gut twisted. He had been on plenty of warships, but this? This felt wrong. Finally, they were brought into a massive chamber. At its center stood a throne, carved from dark, jagged stone. And upon that throne sat a figure clad in obsidian armor, a blood-red cape draped over one shoulder. The warlord. His helmet was removed, revealing pale gray skin, sharp features, and piercing black eyes that seemed to pull in the light around them. He studied them for a long moment before speaking. Silva, he said, his voice a deep rumble. I did not expect to see you again. Ronan's blood ran cold. Silva knew this guy. She straightened. And yet here I am, Corvin. The warlord's lips curved into something resembling a smile. So tell me, he said, standing slowly. Why shouldn't I have you executed on the spot? Ronan tensed, his mind already racing for an escape plan. But Silva didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward. Because I have something you want. Corvin tilted his head. And what is that? Silva's gaze hardened. The location of the Vanthari War Council. Ronan's stomach dropped. What the hell was she doing? Corvin studied her, intrigued. Go on. Silva took a slow breath. The council has gathered in a hidden sector, preparing a preemptive strike against your forces, she said. But their location is protected by cloaking fields. No one outside the High Command knows its exact coordinates. She paused. Except me. Ronan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his expression neutral. She was lying. But Corvin didn't know that. The warlord stepped down from his throne, approaching Silva with measured steps. And you would trade this information, he mused. For what? Silva lifted her chin. His life, she said, nodding toward Ronan. Ronan's eyes widened. Corvin studied her for a long, tense moment. Then, he chuckled. Interesting, he said. Very interesting. He turned to Ronan. You must be quite valuable if she's willing to bargain for you. Ronan forced a smirk. What can I say? I have a charming personality. Corvin's gaze darkened. Perhaps, he said. Or perhaps you are more trouble than you're worth. Before Ronan could react, Corvin moved. Fast. Too fast. A blur of motion. A sharp pain exploded in Ronan's gut. He gasped, stumbling back. Corvin had stabbed him. Not deeply, but enough to send a clear message. Ronan gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. Silva tensed. Corvin. Corvin smirked, withdrawing the blade. I accept your deal, he said. But know this, if you try to deceive me, I will carve the truth from your bones. Silva met his gaze. Understood. Corvin turned to his guards. Take them to the holding chambers, he ordered. They will remain there until she proves her worth. The guards grabbed them, dragging them away. Ronan's vision blurred from the pain, but he managed to glance at Silva. This plan of yours, he rasped. It better be a good one. Silva exhaled. It is, she said. But there was something in her voice. Something that sounded suspiciously like doubt. The breaking point. Ronan sat against the cold, metallic wall of the holding chamber, pressing a makeshift bandage against his side where Corvin had stabbed him. The bleeding had slowed, but every breath sent a sharp jolt of pain through his ribs. You really know how to pick your enemies, he muttered, glancing at Silva. She stood by the door, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. You're still alive, aren't you? She replied. Ronan let out a short, bitter laugh. Barely. The room they were in was small and featureless, the only source of light a dim, pulsating strip along the ceiling. The door was reinforced, and the air smelled sterile, like recycled oxygen and metal. Ronan wasn't new to captivity, but this time was different. This time, they were inside a warship surrounded by thousands of Zenter soldiers, and their only lifeline was a lie. He exhaled. So, mind filling me in on the actual plan? Silva finally turned to look at him. We need to get to the bridge. If we can override the ship's command systems, we can force it into a jump straight into Vanthari space. Ronan's brows furrowed. That's suicide. We'd be jumping straight into a fleet. Silva nodded. Yes. But that's the only way to get this warship away from the Zenter fleet. If we time it right, the Vanthari can disable it and capture Corvin. Ronan stared at her. You do realize you're gambling with our lives, right? Silva knelt in front of him, her gaze sharp. Ronan, if this ship reaches its destination, millions will die. The Zenter aren't just hunting the resistance, they plan to wipe out entire colonies. Ronan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. But how do we get out of here? Silva smirked. That's the easy part. The escape. The door to their holding chamber hissed open, and two Zenter guards stepped inside, weapons raised. Silva moved fast. Before the first guard could react, she lunged, grabbing his arm and twisting it. There was a sickening crack as she wrenched the rifle from his grasp and slammed the butt into his face. The second guard raised his weapon. Ronan, despite the pain, pushed off the wall and drove his shoulder into the guard's chest, sending them both crashing to the floor. The guard struggled, reaching for a blade at his waist, but Ronan was faster. He grabbed the guard's helmet and slammed his head against the floor. Once. Twice. The guard went limp. Ronan groaned, pushing himself up. "Remind me not to get in a fight with you." Silva tossed him one of the rifles. "Stay close." They moved quickly, slipping through the corridors of the warship. The halls were dimly lit, lined with strange, vein-like patterns that pulsed with an eerie glow. Zenter technology was unlike anything Ronan had seen before, organic and mechanical, as if the ship itself was alive. "This way," Silva whispered, leading him toward a maintenance hatch. They climbed inside, crawling through a narrow ventilation shaft. Ronan's side throbbed, but he pushed the pain down. He had a feeling things were about to get a lot worse. The bridge. They emerged near the command deck, concealed behind a panel of maintenance consoles. Through the transparent glass ahead, Ronan could see Corvin standing at the center of the bridge, issuing orders. "All systems ready," one of the Zenter officers reported. "We will reach the invasion coordinates within the hour." Ronan exchanged a glance with Silva. It was now or never. Silva tapped on her wrist device, activating a small disruptor pulse. The lights flickered. Alarms blared. Confusion rippled through the bridge as the Zenter officers scrambled to regain control. Corvin turned sharply, his black eyes narrowing. "What's happening?" Before anyone could react, Silva and Ronan burst onto the bridge, weapons raised. "Nobody move," Ronan barked. The Zenter officers hesitated. Corvin, however, remained still, his gaze locked onto Silva. "You betray yourself, Silva," he said, almost amused. Silva didn't respond. She moved toward the command console, typing rapidly. "She's overriding the jump sequence," one of the officers shouted. Corvin's expression darkened. "Kill them." The bridge erupted into chaos. Ronan fired first, dropping one of the officers before ducking behind a console. Energy blasts flew past him, scorching the walls. Silva continued working, her fingers moving fast. "Almost there," she shouted. Ronan gritted his teeth, returning fire. He took down another officer, but there were too many. Then, a sharp pain exploded in his shoulder. He staggered, biting back a scream. Corvin stood across the bridge, his blade dripping with blood. Ronan fell to one knee. Silva turned, her eyes widening as she saw him. But it was too late. Corvin lunged at her. The gamble. Silva barely dodged, twisting away from Corvin's blade. He was fast. Too fast. But she was desperate. As Corvin swung again, she raised her wrist device and activated the final command sequence. The ship's engines roared. The bridge shook violently. "What have you done?" Corvin snarled. Silva met his gaze. "Checkmate." The ship lurched, then everything around them vanished in a burst of light. They had jumped straight into enemy space. The final descent. The warship emerged from hyperspace, its massive form shuddering under the strain of an unstable jump. Alarms blared across the bridge as the crew struggled to regain control. Ronan clutched his bleeding shoulder, gritting his teeth as pain surged through him. Silva stood at the command console, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Outside the viewport, an armada of Vanthari warships loomed, their weapons already charging. "We made it," Silva whispered. Ronan coughed. "Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they're about to blast us out of the sky." Corvin pushed himself up from the floor, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. "You've doomed us all," he spat. Silva didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and aimed it directly at him. Stand down. The Zenter warlord chuckled darkly. You think you've won? The Vanthari will show no mercy. As if to prove his point, a transmission crackled to life on the bridge's main display. A Vanthari commander, clad in regal armor, glared down at them. Zenter warship, you have trespassed into our territory. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Ronan shot Silva a look. So, what's the plan? Silva exhaled, her fingers dancing over the controls. Sending distress codes now. If they recognize them, we might have a chance. Corvin scoffed. Fools. They will never. A sudden explosion rocked the ship. Ronan swore, gripping the console for support. That felt like a warning shot. The Vanthari commander's voice returned. Your codes are outdated. Prove you are not a threat or prepare to be annihilated. Silva's mind raced. They had only seconds before the Vanthari decided to end them. Then an idea struck her. She turned to Corvin. You want to live? The Zenter warlord's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? Surrender, Silva said. Order your crew to stand down and turn yourself in. If the Vanthari see you as a prisoner, they'll hold fire. Corvin bared his teeth. Never. Ronan, still holding his wound, gave a weak grin. Then we all die. Another explosion rocked the ship. Corvin's face twisted with rage, then, after a long moment, he tapped his communicator. All Zenter forces, he growled. Stand down. Silva relayed the transmission to the Vanthari fleet. A tense silence followed. Then, the weapons of the Vanthari warships powered down. The transmission flickered again, and the Vanthari commander nodded. Prepare to be boarded. Ronan exhaled. We're not dead. I'll take that as a win. But Silva wasn't smiling. She knew this wasn't over yet.